While we were in the living room opening gifts, Dad whispered to my sister, but loud enough for everyone to hear, "He doesn't deserve that car after how he treats us." My mom laughed and said, "If he won't lend it to us, maybe we should teach him a lesson and accidentally scratch it." Their faces went white when I told them I wouldn't pay their mortgage anymore. I, 32M, never imagined Christmas morning would be the day I finally saw my family for what they really were. The living room was warm, decorated with lights my mother had insisted I help hang 3 weeks earlier. Wrapping paper littered the floor as everyone tore through their gifts. My wife sat beside me on the couch, her hand resting on my knee, while my parents and younger sister crowded around the tree. The car had been delivered 2 days before Christmas. A sleek black sedan I'd saved 3 years to afford. It wasn't just transportation, it represented every late night at the office, every promotion I'd earned, every sacrifice I'd made to build something for myself. My father had seen it in the driveway when they arrived Christmas Eve, and I'd caught the look he exchanged with my mother. That hungry, calculating expression I'd learned to recognize over the years. My sister unwrapped an expensive handbag from our parents, squealing with delight. She was 26, still living at home, working part-time at a boutique because anything more demanding interfered with her social life. I'd bought her a gift card, practical and generous, though I knew she'd complain later it wasn't enough. That's when I heard it. Dad leaned toward my sister, his voice pitched just loud enough that it carried across the room. He told her I didn't deserve that car after how I treated them. The words hung in the air like smoke. My wife's hand tightened on my knee. I kept my expression neutral, watching him from the corner of my eye. Mom laughed, that brittle sound she made when she thought she was being clever. She said if I wouldn't lend them the car, maybe they should teach me a lesson and accidentally scratch it. She drew out the word accidentally, like it was a joke, but her eyes were cold. My sister giggled, adding that I was always so selfish with my things. The room went silent. Everyone suddenly realized I'd heard every word. Dad's face flushed, and he started to backtrack, claiming he was just kidding around. Mom waved her hand dismissively, telling me not to be so sensitive. My sister stared at her phone, pretending she hadn't participated. I stood up slowly. My wife followed my lead, her posture tense. I told them we needed to talk. What they didn't know, what I'd never told them, was that I'd been paying their mortgage for the past 18 months. It started when Dad lost his job. He'd been let go from the manufacturing plant where he'd worked for 20 years, a casualty of automation and corporate restructuring. He was 58, too young to retire but too old for most companies to take a chance on. Mom worked retail part-time, barely making enough to cover groceries. When they fell behind on the mortgage, facing foreclosure, they'd come to me desperate and ashamed. I'd agreed to help temporarily, just until Dad found something new, they promised. I paid their mortgage directly to the bank, $1,500 a month, draining my savings account and delaying my own plans. The car I just bought? I could have afforded it a year earlier if I hadn't been supporting them. They never mentioned the help to anyone. Not to my sister, not to their friends, not even to each other in my presence. It was like the money materialized from thin air each month, and they convinced themselves they deserved it. My sacrifice became invisible. The requests started small. Mom needed money for Christmas gifts. Dad's truck needed repairs. My sister wanted concert tickets, and who better to ask than her successful big brother? Each time I said no, they acted wounded, like I was the villain for having boundaries. They never connected my refusals to the fact that I was already subsidizing their entire existence. Now, standing in their living room surrounded by torn wrapping paper and the smell of cinnamon candles, I told them exactly what I'd been paying. The number, the duration, everything. My mother's face went white. She tried to laugh it off, saying I was exaggerating. My father sat down heavily, his earlier bravado evaporating. My sister looked confused, asking why she hadn't known about any of this. I explained that I'd asked them to keep it quiet. I didn't want it to become a thing, didn't want them to feel embarrassed. I genuinely wanted to help family in crisis. But their behavior over the past year had shown me something crucial. They didn't see my help as generosity. They saw it as entitlement. My wife stepped closer to me. She'd been patient through all of this, supportive even when it strained our own finances. But she'd also been the one to point out how my family treated me. How they called only when they needed something. How they criticized my choices while benefiting from my success. How they'd never once asked if I was okay, if the burden was too heavy. I told my parents I wouldn't be paying their January mortgage, or any mortgage after that. The explosion was immediate. Mom started crying, asking how I could do this to them. Dad's face turned purple as he shouted about family loyalty and obligation. My sister accused me of being cruel and vindictive over a stupid comment. They surrounded me, voices overlapping, each trying to guilt me into backing down. I let them rage. When they finally quieted, I laid out the facts. They had 3 weeks until the next payment was due. Dad had been unemployed for a year and a half. Plenty of time to find something, anything, even if it paid less than his old job. Mom could pick up more hours. My sister could contribute rent since she lived there. They had options. They just never needed to pursue them because I was the safety net. Dad demanded to know what they were supposed to do. I suggested he check the job listings I'd been sending him for months, the ones he'd ignored because the positions were beneath him. I mentioned that Mom had turned down a full-time position at her store because she didn't want to work weekends. I pointed out that my sister had never paid a single bill despite working and living at home. Mom called me heartless. She said parents were supposed to be able to depend on their children. I asked her when that relationship had become one-sided. When had it been decided that my financial security mattered less than theirs? When had my hard work become their backup plan? My sister jumped in, defending them. She said I was being dramatic, that they'd just made a joke about the car. I asked her if threatening to damage my property was really just a joke. If disrespecting me in my presence while benefiting from my generosity was funny. She went quiet. I told them I was done. The money I'd been giving them would go toward my own mortgage, my own savings, my own future. My wife and I wanted to start a family. We delayed that dream because I was too busy funding theirs. We left. My mother chased us to the door, begging me to reconsider. Dad stood in the living room, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. My sister filmed it on her phone, probably already planning her victim narrative for social media. The drive home was silent. My wife held my hand across the console, offering quiet support without pushing me to talk. When we got home, I sat in my new car for 20 minutes, just breathing. My phone exploded. Text messages from my mother, my father, my sister. Then extended family members who'd been fed their version of events. I was ungrateful. I was abandoning them. I was breaking up the family over nothing. The cousins and aunts who'd never helped financially now had plenty to say about my moral failings. I blocked most of them. The ones I didn't block, I sent a simple message explaining I'd been paying my parents' mortgage for 18 months, that I'd asked them to keep it private, and that their behavior had made it clear they didn't respect me or my help. The responses varied. Some went silent. Others doubled down, insisting family helped family without conditions. A few, surprisingly, reached out to apologize and say they didn't know the full story. My wife's family was supportive. Her mother called to check on me, telling me she was proud of me for setting boundaries. Her father offered to help if my parents escalated things legally, though he doubted they had any grounds. The next few days were strange. I kept expecting to feel guilty, to second-guess my decision. Instead, I felt lighter. The weight I'd been carrying for a year and a half lifted. My bank account stayed intact. My stress levels dropped. My parents tried everything. Mom sent crying voicemails. Dad sent formal letters about family duty. My sister posted vague social media rants about fake people and blood loyalty. None of it worked. 2 weeks after Christmas, my father called from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer. When I did, his voice was different. Quieter. He asked if we could meet for coffee. I agreed, against my better judgment. We met at a neutral location, a cafe halfway between our houses. He looked tired, older than his 58 years. We sat down with our drinks and he asked how I was doing. I told him I was doing well. He apologized. Not the defensive, excuse-laden apology I'd expected, but a real one. He said he'd been looking at job listings seriously for the first time in months. He'd had 3 interviews. He admitted he'd been coasting, letting me shoulder the burden because it was easier than facing his own fear of starting over. He said Mom was looking into full-time work. They'd sat my sister down and told her she needed to contribute rent or find her own place. I asked him about the car comment. About Mom's threat. He looked ashamed. He said they'd started to resent me without realizing it. My success highlighted their failure. The car was a visible symbol of everything they'd lost and everything I'd achieved while they floundered. Instead of being happy for me, they'd let jealousy poison their gratitude. I appreciated the honesty. I asked him what he wanted from this conversation. He said he wanted me to know he understood why I'd cut them off. He wasn't asking me to resume payments. He just wanted me to know he got it, and he was sorry. We talked for an hour. It wasn't a full reconciliation, but it was a start. When we parted, he hugged me, something he rarely did. He told me he was proud of me and that he'd failed to say that enough. I went home and told my wife. She listened carefully, then asked what I wanted to do. I wasn't sure yet. Update 1. It's been 3 months since I stopped paying my parents' mortgage. I'm writing this because people keep asking what happened and because the situation evolved in ways I didn't expect. My father found a job. It wasn't his old salary, but it was steady work at a warehouse, full-time with benefits. He swallowed his pride and took it. My mother went full-time at her retail job and picked up a second part-time position doing inventory for a local business. Together, they were covering their mortgage. Barely, but they were covering it. My sister moved out. Not by choice. They'd given her an ultimatum about paying rent, and she'd refused on principle. She crashed with friends for a while, posting dramatic stories about being abandoned by her family. Last I heard, she'd rented a studio apartment and was complaining about how expensive living alone was. I didn't engage. The extended family drama died down once people realized I wasn't budging. A few relatives tried to play peacemaker, suggesting family therapy or mediation. I declined. This wasn't about reconciliation on their terms. It was about respect, and respect couldn't be negotiated. My wife and I started trying for a baby. Without the financial drain of my parents' mortgage, we could actually afford to expand our family. She got pregnant in February. We're due in October. When I told my parents, my mother cried. Happy tears this time. She asked if she could be involved, if we'd let her be a grandmother. I told her we'd see how things went. I wasn't ready to fully trust them yet, but I wasn't closed to the possibility either. My father's consistency impressed me. He showed up to work every day. He stopped making comments about my choices or my finances. He asked about my life without immediately segueing into his own problems. Small changes, but meaningful ones. In April, they invited us to dinner. Just the 4 of us, me, my wife, my parents. My sister wasn't mentioned. We went cautiously. The house looked different. Cleaner, somehow. More organized. They'd sold some furniture, downsized their lifestyle. Mom had cooked, nothing fancy, just a simple meal. Over dinner, Dad talked about his job. He'd been promoted to a shift supervisor position. Small pay increase, but it meant something to him. Mom mentioned she was taking online courses in accounting, thinking about a career change. They asked about the baby, about our plans, about us. It felt almost normal. After dinner, Mom pulled me aside. She apologized again, more thoroughly than before. She said she'd been so focused on their problems that she'd stopped seeing me as a person with my own struggles. She said the car comment haunted her, that she couldn't believe she'd been so petty and cruel. She asked if I could forgive her eventually. I told her I was working on it. Update 2. The baby arrived in early October. A healthy boy, 8 pounds, all the right parts. My wife was incredible through the whole thing. We named him after my late grandfather, my mother's father, a man who'd been kind and generous without expecting anything in return. My parents visited the hospital. Mom held her grandson and sobbed. Dad stood beside her, one hand on her shoulder, looking at this tiny person with an expression I'd never seen on his face before. Something like wonder mixed with regret. He told me he wished he'd been a better father to me. He said holding his grandson made him realize all the moments he'd missed by being so focused on himself. He promised to be a better grandfather than he'd been a parent. I didn't know what to say to that, so I just nodded. My sister showed up uninvited, having heard through the family grapevine. She wanted to meet her nephew. Security almost turned her away, but I told them to let her in. She came into the room, arms full of gifts we didn't need, talking too loudly about how excited she was to be an aunt. She asked to hold the baby. I said no. She looked hurt, confused. I told her she could be part of his life when she demonstrated she could respect boundaries and behave like an adult. Until then, she was welcome to send cards, but that was it. She left crying. Mom looked like she wanted to defend her, but stayed quiet. Dad nodded slightly, like he understood. The first few months of parenthood were brutal. Sleepless nights, constant worry, the overwhelming responsibility of keeping a tiny human alive. But they were also beautiful. My son had my wife's eyes and my stubborn chin. He was perfect and exhausting in hours. My parents asked if they could help. I let them, carefully. They babysat occasionally, always respectful of our rules and schedules. Mom never overstepped. Dad was surprisingly good with the baby, patient in ways he'd never been with me. One evening, while Dad was rocking my son to sleep, he told me something. He said losing his job had broken something in him. He'd defined himself by his work for so long that without it, he didn't know who he was. He'd lashed out at me because my success reminded him of his failure. He'd taken my help for granted because acknowledging it meant admitting he needed it. He said therapy had helped. He'd started going after I cut them off, trying to figure out why he'd sabotaged his relationship with his son. He'd learned some hard truths about himself, about pride, about fear. I asked him why he was telling me this. He said because I deserved to understand it wasn't about me. His behavior, Mom's behavior, the entitlement and resentment, none of it was really about me. It was their own pain misdirected. It didn't excuse what they'd done, but it explained it. And somehow, that helped. Update 3. My son is 6 months old now. He started solid foods and laughs at everything. My relationship with my parents has settled into something new. Not what it was before, but not completely broken either. They've paid their mortgage on time for 8 consecutive months. Dad got another promotion. Mom finished her accounting certification and landed a better job. They're stable, functioning, independent. They don't ask me for money. They don't make comments about my car or my choices or my life. My sister is still on the outskirts. She sends gifts on holidays, always expensive things clearly meant to prove something. I acknowledge them politely, but maintain my boundaries. She hasn't apologized, hasn't changed. Maybe she will eventually. Maybe she won't. That's her journey. I think about that Christmas morning sometimes. About the moment I heard my father's comment and my mother's threat. About how close I came to letting it slide, to pretending I hadn't heard, to maintaining the status quo because confrontation was uncomfortable. Cutting off the mortgage payments was the hardest thing I'd done. It felt cruel, even though I knew it wasn't. It felt like abandonment, even though I was the one being used. The guilt was enormous. But it was also necessary. They needed to stand on their own. I needed to stop sacrificing my future for their comfort. My wife needed a partner who prioritized our family. My son needed a father who modeled healthy boundaries. The car still sits in my driveway, unscratched. I drive it to work every day, a reminder of what I earned and what I'm worth. My parents see it when they visit, and now they smile instead of scowl. Dad complimented it last week, said he was proud I'd worked so hard for something I wanted. It was a small moment, but it mattered. I'm not sure what the moral of this story is. Maybe it's about boundaries. Maybe it's about recognizing when help becomes harm. Maybe it's about the difference between supporting someone and enabling them. Or maybe it's simpler than that. Maybe it's just about knowing your worth and refusing to let anyone, even family, make you forget it. My family isn't perfect now. We're still working through years of dysfunction and resentment. But we're working through it honestly, with respect, with accountability. That's more than we had before. And my son will grow up knowing that love doesn't mean accepting mistreatment. That family doesn't mean unlimited access to your resources. That generosity is a gift, not an obligation. He'll grow up knowing he's worth standing up for, just like his father finally learned.